Okay, so we had the first 24 hours of Ryzen and Ryzen benchmarks. Of course, it's way early to draw final conclusions, but there are some things to discuss even at this stage, and some findings that I find interesting. First of all, and I'm not sure if anyone expected this, but an 8-core 16-thread processor is in 2017 not the ideal gaming processor, gaming CPU. Gaming mostly favors raw megahertz. So an overclocked 77K on 5 gigahertz will beat most current processors in game. So I guess the question with the Ryzen 7 was, will it even compete? And I think it's fair to say that it does compete, but it doesn't beat the pure gaming processor from Intel. So that's one thing. I think for gaming competitiveness, we have to wait for the Ryzen 5, and we'll have to see if it will overclock better than the Ryzen 7. And that's my second point. Overclocking so far, it hasn't been great. Of course, it's 24 hours in, but overclocking has... I see most of the big reviewers can get 4.1, 4.2 on the 1800X, which leads me to believe that on air at least, or on like non-super coolers, reviewers are able to overclock the processor as high as the processor itself can go on turbo or on one core. So the 1800X will turbo up to 4.1, 4.2, and that's how much they're able to push all cores on overclocking. I think what's the only thing that kind of impressed me a little bit was Joker, the Joker Productions channel on YouTube. And he pushed his 1700, the basic lowest level version. He pushed it to 3.9 gigahertz on air, and even with low temperatures. So that processor, which just has only 65 watt TDP, 30 watts lower than the 1800 and 1800X. That seems like the best overclocker so far in terms of its base frequency. It's also the cheapest one out there, and it did the 3.9 gigahertz with low temperatures, even on full load. So when it comes to bang for the buck, the 1700, of course, Joker can have gotten like a freak version of the 1700. But if people are starting to try out the 1700, which has been the processor I've seen the least testing of and benchmarking of until now, if the 1700 can easily clock to 3.9 gigahertz, that would be an amazing productivity and probably as well gaming processor. So that's the bang for the buck. There's also been some issues with the with RAM. The highest I've seen people can get it up to is 2933, with many people landing max at 2600. This is a bit of a disappointment, but RAM timings and RAM overclocking is very much dependent on the EFI and the motherboards, and it's still early days. So it might be an mainboard issue, and it can be problems that can be overcome. We'll have to see. But early conclusions, early summaries for productivity and bang for the buck. Ryzen's really kicked some butt here, and Intel has to respond with a massive lowering of price. I can't see they have any new CPUs that they can release ahead of schedule, so they have to respond with lowering their prices. For pure gaming, they're still ahead, but maybe they're biting their fingernails over the Ryzen 5, at least if that's a good clocker. And between the three, if the 1700 easily across the board can clock on air to 3.9 gigahertz, that is an amazing processor for the money. Well, it's early days. So far, so good. I'm so glad AMD is back in business, and we're looking forward to testing it further.